There's a couple fun ones actually. Several good ones just came out today. The Aurora attacks, let's see, this guy is screaming bloody murder. He's a LA Times reporter, and he was a Reuters, and he also worked for Reuters, and he was in Anonymous, and he went into a chat room and he gave them a name and password to access the website so they could deface the website for fun. And now he's screaming bloody murder because they fired him, saying they had no right to do anything to him, this is all just fine, and they should have let him get away with it, which is, anyway. It's pretty extreme to me. I would think any employee that handed out the password to hackers so they could hack your network, you'd never hire them, you'd blacklist them, and never get a job again, I would think. But he feels greatly abused, which is, that's the anonymous way. They think they should go free. On the grounds he didn't really do all the harm. But still, you can't be doing that. You can't hand out passwords and letting other people hack your company website. You have to be able to trust people. Anyway, and so here's a Metasploit. This is H.D. Moore, who's awesome. There's now, the one I saw here, this seems like this is the Dell DRAC and similar devices. If you have a hardware device of some kind, and you might want to turn it off and turn it back on again, or deal with a power failure or reflash the BIOS or something, you normally have to drive to the physical location of the device and do that, and nobody wants to do that. So they are remote control devices that will let you control more and more about what your machine does over the internet. And one common part of it is the serial port service that lets you do things that would go in the serial port remotely over the internet. And he found thousands of them, and just as you would expect if you've been looking at SCADA security, most of these are sitting on the internet, not behind a VPN appliance or anything, with no password at all. Like he says, to improve security, they should use Telnet. Because right now they have no security at all, no password at all. This is what BART had. When there was a penetration test on BART, that Brett Harden talks about maybe 5 or 10 years ago, they went to BART and he was doing a penetration test in their network. He scanned their network, he found a server, he connected, and all it said was 0. So he typed in 0, it said 0, he typed in 1, it said 1. Couldn't figure out what that was. That was the master control switch to turn off all the trains. No password at all, just a controller, and you feed it the number, it does what you say. That's what they typically are, because they rely upon the fact that nobody will find that address. This is the way PBXs were set up for years. If you bought a PBX from the phone company, leased it from the phone company, they'd put it on there, you'd have all your telephone calls going through it, and there would be one of your numbers would be the control number. And if you dialed into that number, you could just reprogram the PBX. And they just counted on nobody finding that phone number. That was it. This is called security through obscurity. And it's not hard to find a phone number. The War Games movie was the one that showed that. You could just take a Commodore VIC-20 and program it to dial all the phone numbers. As long as you don't mind breaking the law and irritating a bunch of people getting crank phone calls, you would just let this thing run all night. You would wake up everybody all night long, and then in the morning it would list you the ones that were modems, which is probably 20 of them, and then you call them and find out what they got. Anyway, but that's the game. There's thousands of these things out there. That's what they look like. They're enormously popular because they give you an opportunity to remote control devices. So now you can just have one system administrator for all of your 10 company offices scattered all over the world. They don't have to drive to work very often. They can control them all remotely over the internet. But you should put these things behind a VPN client, so people have to log in with some kind of security before they get to them, and a lot of people don't. This one is stirring people up. So Google started the current rage of getting mad at China by revealing that they've been hacked by China for years, and they call this the Aurora attack. And they said that their real goal of China was to get to their law enforcement register. Google set up a special server for law enforcement to use to get the call register so they can find out who has been sending emails to who else without giving you the content of the emails, because this is something you can usually get with an easy-to-obtain court order. And this is what they usually get. They also call it the call register for telephone lines when you don't want a wiretap, but you just want to know who did they call and when. That's easier to get. That's usually what most data requests are for. And so they set up that server, and that's what the Chinese went for. And the Google interpretation of this was what they were attempting to do was to find out who was opposing the Chinese government back home and find out who was in on conspiracies, having to do with Tibet and such. But what Microsoft just said, with their analysis of the Chinese hacking them, is what they are really trying to do is find out if we have found their agents in America yet or not. And this is a clever trick, and the last person who used this trick was Kevin Mitnick. Kevin Mitnick tapped the FBI's phone lines to listen to their conversations to find out how close they were to catching him. And that's the point. This is one way to find out what the cops know. Don't attack the cops. Attack the phone companies that are responding to wiretap orders to see if they're tapping the lines of your spies. then you have a much easier target to attack, and you can find out if they know about my spies or not. So I don't know if this is true, but it is a good idea. It's another interpretation of the data. And another report just came out showing that I think 95% of all cyber espionage detected comes from China. So they really are a big player in this field. They're really doing it to a lot of American companies and doing it very openly. The amazing thing to me is how brazen they are about it. They aren't making the slightest attempt to hide themselves, which is sort of an insult. Anyway, yeah.
Have you been paying attention to the CISPA thing?
Not really. Someone said it got passed.
It's already passed. It's already passed.
Well, it's not law yet. It's passed.
Well, yeah, it's not law. Yeah, passed.
Obama is vetoed, but...
And I've heard some arguments on both sides to where I sort of lost interest. There's privacy advocates that are very upset they can be in the world. There's law enforcement and serious security people saying it's a very good thing because it will allow information sharing about attacks in America, which is currently not permitted. So I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion about it.
Perhaps it's way too much of an opinionated subject to be involved in a class, I think.
This is a perfectly good class to have opinions.
Arguing.
That's true, but you know, this it's important.
Like when we were talking about the lock thing, about the court said that his password was not a lock, but human beings started locking things and started protecting things in caves, and like how that's becomes no right after it becoming 2,025 years of use.
See, well, see, the problem is Moore's law. Technology changes so fast that we're like, there are people that go to church and they want to obey like the Ten Commandments. They're trying to take something from 4,000 years ago and figure out how to apply it to the modern world. You have to reason by analogy. And you have to do that with the law now. Laws written in the 70s don't contain anything about what we're really dealing with now. So you have to argue in court. Is a password like a key? If your account is a closed box with a mechanical lock, then there's a law to cover that. But if it's a different kind of analogy, if it's like an open box or something, your lawyer will come up with some analogy of which you interpret the law, and the other guys will have another analogy, and you try to decide which one is closer because the law doesn't really address what you're doing. It gets to be more and more an artistic, creative enterprise. So let's try some of this encryption stuff. So asymmetric encryption, everybody that wants to play this game has to make a key pair. And nobody else can do it for you because you have to have this private key that you never tell anybody. So everybody that wants to join the club of communicating by asymmetric encryption has to make their own key pair, and then, this is pretty easy. You do some math, your computer will do this for you easily. You make a secret key, add a public key. Then you've got the hard part. You have to tell other people your public key so they can talk to you. And that is not math, and it is possible for someone else to make a bogus public key and pretend it's your key. And then if they get the wrong public key, then they're sending the information to the wrong person. So that's a problem, and the math doesn't solve that problem for you. But if you do successfully get the public key to the people who want to talk to you, then they can talk to you with essentially perfect confidence that nobody's going to read that except you, as long as the algorithm is okay and the key is long enough, and those are pretty achievable these days. Anyway, that's the game. But what you need is you need a mathematical relationship between the keys such that something scrambled at the public key can be unscrambled at the private key. So they have to be related numbers, but the relationship must be impossible to reverse. You can create the public key from the private key, but nobody can deduce the private key from the public key. That's what you want. Just like hashing, you need a one-way function that can be done one way, but is very difficult to do the other way. So there are various ways to do this, but anyway, that's the game. Anything encrypted with the public key must be decrypted with that private key. You can also encrypt stuff with the private key, and then anybody can decrypt it with the public key, and that's how you make a signature. It's not a secret at all. It's just that you're the only one that could create it. So anybody can decrypt it and find what you wanted to say and read it, and the fact that they can decrypt it and get something that makes sense proves that it was signed by the holder of the private key. Yeah?
But the message itself is encrypted, correct?
You can go, signatures are typically not encrypted. A signature is not a private thing or secret.
But the message?
You can use this for encryption or you can use it for signing, and those are separate. You can combine them both or you can do each of them separately. That's the game. So, but typically signatures, you don't want them to be secret. You usually put them with something like a loan agreement, and that's a public record. Say this guy got a house loan, has to make these payments, that's all public record, and here's the signature proving he really signed it. So that's common, that's out there, so other people can search. And if somebody else tries to sell my house, they can find out that I really own it. And so you have to distribute that public key somehow, and there are public key servers out there that distribute these. The MIT runs them and other people run them. There are various networks to just deliver public keys to people. Now, symmetric encryption is still around because it's faster. Otherwise, you just use asymmetric for everything. But symmetric encryption exists, and it's faster. So what you typically do, rather than sending your entire message with asymmetric encryption, is you just set up the asymmetric encryption and then send a secret key, and use symmetric encryption after that point. And this will therefore be essentially as secure and much faster. Because the keys, yeah.
You said it's faster, but the next sentence says it's too slow to encrypt all the traffic.
What's that?
The next sentence on there said it's too slow to encrypt all traffic. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
for asymmetric encryption, yeah.
Say-
Asymmetric encryption is too slow to practically encrypt everything with it. So you use it as little as possible. So what you do is you set up the asymmetric encryption, and then you use it to send a 128-bit private key. And then from then on, just use that private key.
Oh.
So you use public key encryption to create that trusted channel to transmit the secret key. And then you typically use it only for one session. Like when you connect to Gmail and you're logging, you're going to create a secret key just for one use, use it for the duration of that session. When you close the browser, it's gone. Next time you connect, you get a different one. So that's reasonably secure. And it's much faster. You could just encrypt everything with public key encryption, and that is done by products that use like some email encryption like PGP, but it's not usually done because it just wastes a lot of time going through 2,048 bits of encryption on things that could be just as secure with only 128 bits of encryption after you exchange the key. Yeah.
Mr. Bowen, you said we use asymmetric encryption to encrypt like a certificate and use symmetric encryption to encrypt the data.
That's right. So the only thing you really encrypt with asymmetric encryption is the private key, which you will use for future messages. So that's just the way it's done to make it more practical.
I think what's
Yep.
confusing on that slide
Yeah.
is that the second item, it says it's too slow to encrypt all traffic.
Yeah.
That refers to asymmetric
It does,
encryption
yes, that's right.
versus not the symmetric key,
That's
which
right.
is the title.
That's right. That's right. This is referring to asymmetric encryption. Yeah, okay, good. Thank you. All right. So here's asymmetric encryption protocols. SSL is the main one. TLS. These are what are used for HTTPS. Which is most of what we're all using. RSA is the most common one using these prime numbers. There are other ones here like SMIME and PGP, which can use a variety of techniques. There's also different kinds of mathematics. Now, all these typically use prime numbers. That was the original system. The private key was a prime number, and you would multiply it by another prime number and create a compound number that was very long, like 200 digits. And it is a well-known mathematical fact that if you have a long number, you cannot resolve it into its component primes in any reasonable amount of time. There is no algorithm known that is any faster than trying all the prime numbers up to the square root of it. So if I give you a 200-digit number, and you know it's the product of two primes, you're going to have to do something like 10 to the 100 divisions to find it, because you're going to have to try all the prime numbers up to the square root of it, which is a 100-digit number. And that's far more computations than you can ever accomplish. So that's the basic mathematics here. Unfortunately, prime numbers are actually pretty complicated to use, and multiplication and division are pretty long processes. So that's not the most efficient, but it's the one that became the standard. Elliptic curves use a different class of mathematics having to do with finding points on elliptic curves, and LGML uses logarithms instead, and all of these have the same property that there is a one-way function that can't be reversed. And they're in fact much faster. They use less CPU and use less battery. But the standard is the prime number one, and nobody has changed for most applications. So your book has this thing he invented called a Rayburn box, which currently does not exist, but it sounds like a pretty good idea to me. You have a box that locks with one key and unlocks with a different key. This seems like this could be quite useful to couriers and people moving money and evidence and all sorts of things, but that's what private key encryption is like. You lock the box, nobody can open it except that they have the special key. It's a good idea. So anybody put on a lot of copies of the public keys, which means anybody can lock the box with a message in it, but I'm the only one that can open it and get the message out. Anyway, mailboxes are similar, just kind of mailbox. Anybody can put mail in, but nobody can get the mail out except the post handler who has the key to open that thing. Now, in real post office boxes, that's a pretty lame key, like a bathroom paper towel key, but the point is, the reason that lock is there is supposedly nobody can get in there except the authorized representative. So this is what public key encryption is like. Anybody can send messages, I'm the only one that can receive. All right. So now the only issue is how do I get the public key to somebody and they know it's really me? That's what certificates are for. Oh, I made a mistake here. I gotta shrink this. This is PowerPoint. I should have learned, there we go, good, okay. didn't crash entirely on me. The Microsoft Office on the latest Mac operating system has a lot of problems. Anyway, all right, so certificates are an ID card. This ties a public key to your real identity. And it's issued by a trusted third party, the certificate authorities. Just like if I want to sell liquor at the grocery store, I have to see a card that you got from the state of California, proving that you're really 18. And I trust it because it comes from a trusted third party. So the certificate authorities are the trusted third parties that issue these certificates. They're just like any other ID card. They're supposed to be hard to forge and reliable. You can contact the certificate authority to verify them. So the certificate delivers to you a public key so you can encrypt things. And you can also use this for digital signatures and authentication. If you have your own certificate, you can use to prove who you are. So here's what they look like. Anytime you open a secure page on the web, you'll see it. There's Gmail's one. And so inside there, it tells me issued by Thought and to mail.google.com. So the first thing it tells me is who am I talking to? I'm talking to this web server, google.com, mail.google.com. And who verifies that? The certificate authority named Thought. Thought is the certificate authority formed by Mark Shuttleworth, for which he made so much money that after that he funded Ubuntu Linux and he flew up to space and everything else. He's a multi-billionaire and all that jazz now for making a certificate authority. So this is one of the well-known certificate authorities. It's only good for a certain amount of time. It'll expire on a certain date, and then they're going to have to buy another or renew it. It's valid, and when your browser says it's valid, it says this means three things. It means you're within the date range, and this is valid. You are really at this URL. This matches what's in your browser. And this certificate authority is in your list of trusted authorities. Your browser comes preloaded with about 100 trusted certificate authorities. And anything signed by any one of them, you will believe if those three conditions are met. And so since I now believe that I'm really talking to Google, then I go in here and find their key. And there's a public key here, 128 bytes, and there's a signature here too. I want that. So I can now encrypt anything I want with this 128 byte key and safely send it to Google with enormous confidence that nobody is going to read it except Google. As long as I trust Thought. And Thought's only product is trust. They don't sell, they don't have money, they don't sell t-shirts, they got nothing else. The only thing they have is that people trust them enough to do this job, so they have a financial motivation to have secure servers, not get hacked, not let people get bribed and all that jazz. That's the theory on which certificate authorities rest. Yeah?
Like most of the things they can bypass with the man in the middle. Why the man in the middle cannot put stuff in the middle so the certificate is blocked?
If I'm in the middle, I will have to, I'm not going to be able to make a genuine certificate. Only they can because they've signed it with their private key at Thought. So if I stand in the middle and I send you a fake certificate, when your browser contacts Thought, they will say, no, that is not a genuine certificate. I
Can you not accept that part too?
Oh, no, you can't, because you have that trusted certificate authority list in your browser, and it includes cryptographic signature, which only Thought can vanish. So I can't. I would have to subvert your machine and add myself to the trusted certificate store. Then it would work. But I can't. That's the idea. That's protected also. Well, I'm not sure exactly how they do it, but I think they do it essentially with digital signatures. You don't just put the name of the company in the certificate store. You put identifiers that only Thought can do it. So this is what you protect yourself against, a man-in-the-middle attack. If I pretend to be Gmail and I'm not, your browser will not be fooled, because they will not find that anybody on the list of trusted certificates will agree that this is a genuine certificate. So this is what I mentioned before. Private asymmetric keys have to be very long. And since 2010, even 1024 bits is not considered long enough. Everyone should be using 2048 bits or longer for public keys. Most websites I go to are still using 1024-bit keys, though, even though they shouldn't be. However, no one has yet broken into a 1024-bit key by brute force, but they have broken into a 768-bit key. So it's close enough that people are getting nervous. So RSA is the cryptography invented by these three guys, Ravesh, Shamir, and Edelman, and then they formed the company and the conference and everything, and for a long time they were the only certificate authority. This was it. They were the one company trusted by everybody to make the web secure. And that was the standard for HTTPS. And there's nothing wrong with it, really, although the company did make the usual kind of security mistakes. For a while they continued to verify their primary certificates with an MD5 hash until people at DEF CON actually forged that, and they were able to perform that man-in-the-middle attack by fooling your browser into thinking they were really the RSA servers when they weren't, to shame them into upgrading to SHA-1. But other than that, usual kind of mistakes. they've done pretty well. DiffieHellman is one of the crucial mathematical discoveries that made this all possible. They figured out how to exchange keys between two parties. It's part of the system of public key cryptography. This is not a cryptographic technique in itself, but it's the crucial part, where you move a secret over a public channel without having any trusted channel anywhere. That's the ultimate goal of all this. And so that was invented by DiffieHellman, and I went to DEF CON. These guys were there. That's Marchi, Marlis, Mike, and Whitfield Diffie. Diffie is the mathematician that was smart enough to recreate this system, which, by the way, apparently was known by the National Security Agency for decades. The American U.S. government and military used it in secret and didn't tell anybody, and they liked it that way, of course. And they were very interested in no one else finding out, because this was very, very scary to the U.S. government. Now you can do something rotten. You can plan terrorist activity, and if you use public key encryption, the government cannot open that stuff. They don't want anybody to have cryptography that they can't open, but they're not kidding. They really can't open that stuff as far as anybody can tell. So they tried to prevent anybody from knowing it as long as possible, but the smart mathematicians, largely him, figured out independently on the outside how to do this. So as far as anybody knows, it did not leak out of the NSA. It was independently invented by mathematicians on the outside, published in scientific journals, but that's what happens. You can't really keep math a secret forever. Because people just have to be smart, and they will eventually find your math out there. So elliptic curve cryptography is faster and more efficient than RSA, amounts to essentially the same thing, and that's actually used by some portable wireless devices to save your battery, because it takes less compute cycles to do the encryption. And it's been approved by National Institute of Standards as secure enough. So, if you want clickers, you want to grab one if you need one when you're shopping online. All right. The only thing that's used here is a certificate of authority. The WPA is not protecting you from man-in-the-middle attacks on the internet. And I'm even sure it might protect you from man-in-the-middle attacks on your own wireless network. But those are not the ones you're usually worried about. The main fundamental thing people worry about is I could put up a fake server that looks like Yahoo and then take your money. You're sending money through the internet, and how do you know you're going to the right person? This is the most #1 risk. And the certificate of authority is what protects you there. If the certificate authorities are doing their job correctly, then when they tell you that's really Google, it is really Google and nobody else. That's what they're there for. They're for identifying people. All right, so when I use Gmail, what technology provides confidentiality? I'm not going to be able to grade this one because it's more complicated. I'm probably just going to answer all over the place. Yeah, I'm thinking, I tried, the problem is it's more complicated than having a simple answer here. And I tried to write this. The certificate is necessary. There are different issues. The certificate is the only thing to let you know who you're talking to. So you could regard that as confidentiality. But the public key is used, but it's only used to encrypt a private key. And you actually send your data with the private key, which is what I think, anyway. So there's no simple one answer to this, forget that. That question is too extreme for me to put up with. How about authenticity? Here there's probably more of a reasonable answer, but you're probably not going to like it. Remember, this is the messages I sent. I don't know. I think I can't read this one here. Either I was stupid when I wrote these, or I'm stupid today, or both. But I was originally thinking of the password here. The password is what determines your authenticity, but that is not included in anything you send to Google. So, in fact, Google, the thing is, Google does not know who you are, and they don't care either. All they care is the credit card is real. So, I think I'm going to forget that one too. Let's see if, yeah, go ahead.
The certificate could be an answer because, for instance,
But I don't have
in the military when we used our CAT cards,
yeah,
the CAT cards had a certificate on there that, and to send emails, you had to use that, and it verified that you were the one sending it, that repudiation.
Exactly. That would work, but normal people don't have certificates. But that's right. If you have a certificate, then it's clearly your best ID card.
What if there's a private case of signatures and that?
Well, you don't sign this stuff you're sending Gmail. You don't really have a public-private key pair that you can decide to use. It's just created by your browser for one session and then thrown away. So actually, Google does not know who you are, and they really don't care. But of course, this is a problem, because if you stole the credit card and they're not ever going to get paid, they do care about that. And currently, there is no system protecting us from that. There's a ton of fraud. So it's important, but there is no cure answer. Let me get rid of that one too. See if any of these make any sense. This one has an answer. All right. And that's the elliptic curves they use. All right, now, there's one thing or two I want to mention here, which I think are not in the lecture notes, but it's worth knowing about these keys. So if I go to gmail.com, I just spelled it a little better, there we go. Okay, there's Gmail. Now if I go click on this thing, then it tells me in mail.google.com it's green and it says identity verified. Now that is not always the case. You can go, some of them have the blue certificates, and I'm not sure I know a good example of where to go to find one. These green certificates are identity verified. The blue ones are exactly the same mathematics, but they don't see identity verified, and they're much cheaper. These green ones are like $1,000 a year. The blue ones are like $300 a year. The blue ones have the same link to the private key and everything. What happens is, if you get a green one, you are paying for a detective work to be performed. They are going to actually try to verify that you're a legitimate business. You can't get it if you're in certain countries that are known to have a lot of crooks. You have to actually have a business license. You know, they put some effort into checking with humans to make sure you're a legitimate company if you're green. The blue one, they just sell to anybody that will pay the fee. Yeah.
Okay. Is that why sometimes you get the message that, I get the message that like the certificate looks good, but it hasn't been verified?
Yes, that's exactly. Because the cryptographic community largely regards this as a scam, and they say they're just ripping you off. The size of the key is the same. They're just trying to line their own pockets by scaring customers that haven't paid for that green certificate, which they probably don't really do any work on. And that might be true. But anyway, that's the difference between the green and the blue ones you'll see here. They're the same mathematics underneath, but supposedly the issue is that a human put some work into checking to see if this was obviously a fraudulent company before letting them have a green certificate. Anyway.
If a certificate says it has, because this is what I was talking about,
Yeah.
Sean, maybe you guys yours things better.
Back, probably, right? Right forward. Yeah. Certificate has not been verified.
Yeah.
And it's because
Not from a trusted authority.
That's from the DoD. It's the same website, but you must have a probably better cache of certificates or something.
Well, not from a trusted authority, and it's Army.mil. That's kind of disturbing.
And it says it's
Who
got like
is
the SHA-256 fingerprint, and it's
Yeah,
got all the information.
that means something wrong. Maybe your browser's out of date or something. I don't know. That's goofy. Not from a trusted authority, though. And I ought to mention that. I don't know if we've shown you those, but the trusted authorities. Yeah, go ahead.
Who really is a trusted authority anymore? Because thought is no longer keeps a web of trust. They say that they can't maintain a web of trust anymore. And who's number one in the country for issuing certificates?
Thought said that?
I don't know. I thought I had heard something like 2-3 years ago about Thought was losing a handle on its web of trust.
Oh, well, they're losing money maybe, but I don't think they're going out of business. Let me find the certificate authorities.
You should scroll down.
Yeah.
Show advanced.
Yeah, try. I found it before. Privacy, that's a pretty good start. Privacy, passwords, network languages. Here we go. This is beginning to look right. There, finally, the system roots. Okay, they keep moving around in different versions of the browser, so I get more and more confused. But there they are. I know this list because I looked through it many times. These are the people you trust every time you shop online. A Trust N Qual, whoever they are. AAA certificate, Raiz. I haven't met anybody who can even know who they are yet. America Online, I know who they are. Apple. Belgium, which is the nation of Belgium. And what's good, clean fun is China is here. So if China signs a certificate, your browser accepts it. This is true for the whole world. And we know they're hacking us right and left. Why in the world do I trust China? I'm on a special hate list of people I distrust more than nobody for them. And Cisco can sign them, and everybody can sign them. Komodo, the Germans can sign it. Cert. And anyway, on it goes. All these people you trust, and you trust them all equally. If any one of these people signs a certificate, you believe it. So if you go to Gmail, and today it's China's government signing the certificate, your browser says, yes sir, that's really Gmail, don't worry. That's why people are trying to fix this system. This is actually not working out too well, because China has practiced 3 times that we caught them with a weapon to alter BGP traffic, to put themselves in the middle of American companies and sign the stuff with false certificates. So it can totally be done, and it is being done, and so people are pretty nervous. Right now, a lot of people are in this list, including a lot of people that we more or less regard as untrustworthy nations. And several of these companies have publicly admitted that they sell root certificates to anybody that drives into them up. So, yeah.
Would the certificates vary if you were using Firefox?
No, not by much. However, that's an important issue. How do you get on this list? It would probably be better if you had to like apply to the government, be approved by the National Institute of Standards, but each browser maker just puts whoever they want on the list. And Mozilla, for example, is currently considering throwing someone off the list because the company sells software products to like Syria or something, which are used to oppress the people. So as a political statement, they want to remove them from the list. Other people think that's not right to do. Each browser maker goes through their own internal process and decides who to put on there. So you're trusting whoever Microsoft decided you should trust if you use IE, and you're trusting whoever Google thought you should trust if you use Chrome. Yeah?
I think
Is there a way to edit that?
Yes, you can remove things and add things to it, but how would you know? And the problem is if you took out one of the big ones, a bunch of websites wouldn't be you couldn't connect to them anymore. So there's a serious problem here. Yeah?
And aren't several companies already grandfathered into being certificates of authority, whatever, for whatever reason?
No, just
forever and ever and ever?
Well, no, nothing's
because
forever.
they were the first, like, people that had enough points and
No, I don't
were
think so.
trusted enough?
No, you always have to go to one of the root GAs every time you make an HTTPS connection, and you could take any of them out. So you could take some out, like you could take China out if you don't like it, or you could also put in your own company there, which is what people will do with their own company if they don't feel like buying a real public certificate, so their own employees can use HTTPS. But anyway, that's how it works. That's what we're all using. That's what we're trusting all our transactions to because it's all we have. Anyway. So steganography is another kind of cryptography where you hide the existence of a message completely so people do not even know you're sending a message. This is actually a really big deal because traffic analysis is a serious weakness. If you go to work and your boss says you're not allowed to read personal email at work and you log into Gmail and read personal mail, you might say, well, it's encrypted so my boss can't read it. And that might be true, but your boss can tell what address you're going to and how many packets you sent. And that's enough to prove that you're reading your Gmail. So he can't read the messages, but he can still tell you're breaking the policy. And by analyzing the total amount of traffic sent and where it goes, you can often find out what you need to know. So to avoid that, use steganography. Then you hide something and people do not even know you're sending a message at all. So you want to send this picture, so you embed it in that picture, and you post this picture on the web someplace. This is how terrorists move their orders. The military talks about it frequently. They have a arrangement, like the 14th cat when you search for kittens on Flickr to take a secret message. And they know to look for it, and then they have some software to extract this out. And you just make up any encoding scheme you want. The simplest one is to just take the low order bits of the color. Pictures have red, green, and blue. Each one of those is 8 bits. If you take the last 2 bits and change them, it'll make a tiny change in the color that you would never notice, but that means you could put 2 bits out of every 8 of secret in here. So you can put a file in here as long as it's no bigger than 1/4 the size. And you can make up your own algorithm, and making up your own algorithm is, of course, the safest, because it doesn't have to be mathematically perfect or anything. The way you usually crack this stuff is either people use a known algorithm, and there are known steganography tools that will try all the known algorithms, or you find the original image someplace, and you can compare it and say, wait, somebody has flipped some bits in this image, therefore I can tell there's something in there. Even if I can't get it out, I can at least tell that somebody's using that message for steganography. And there's a bunch of others. Here's one which is kind of fun. You steganography through spam. You send your target a bunch of spam email. It generates stuff that looks like it's talking about Viagra and nonsense, and it's got your secret in there, a certain pattern of words to encode other words. It'll just be blocked by spam filters and nobody will pay any attention to it. But it's another container to hide secrets in. So that's steganography. Nobody even knows you've done it. That's a covert channel, a way to send messages out that people don't even know they're being sent out. And this is what spies have been doing this for years. They have like a loose brick in the wall and they'll hide something behind the brick and people don't even know they're sending a message, but they are. Quantum cryptography is another cute one. Probably most correctly described as quantum key distribution. This relies on a real simple fact. A photon can only be measured once. It's just like the Mission Impossible self-destructing tape. One person can listen to this tape and then it will burn up. So you can send a message one photon at a time, and only one person will ever read it. Then you send a verification back to see if it got there uncorrupted, and if it did, you know that it didn't get read by anybody else. It was read only by the intended recipient. That's the fundamental principle here. And it's very cute. Unfortunately, I thought this came out, I thought everyone would dump this immediately. Banks would go to it. This is so much better than any kind of mathematical encryption because it can never be broken. And within a year, there's an attack that works on quantum cryptography involving using quantum teleportation to copy the packets, at least in theory. And they started selling commercial quantum cryptography units. You can buy them now. They go up to 171 miles to send your stuff with quantum cryptography. And it turns out that when they created them, they left the automatic gain adjustment on the optical receivers. So there is an attack that totally breaks them. All you do is you pump in a lot of light. So there is more than one photon in the message. That causes it to turn back into the classical regime, and there's no security at all anymore, because they didn't measure the total amount of power in the line and include that. So that's what always happens. You have this beautiful system, and then when you actually build a real device, you make compromises and introduce vulnerabilities. But here they are, $82,000. You can buy yourself a quantum cryptographic centered receiver and send your stuff with the miracle of quantum cryptography, which does not rely on mathematics to scramble the message. It relies upon fundamental principles of photons and optics. So SSL is the one we're mostly using, created by Netscape, and then they put other things in it, FTP or HTTP. It uses certificates, and it uses asymmetric cryptography and symmetric cryptography. It's one I've been described all along. It uses the asymmetric cryptography to send a symmetric key, and then everything after that is encrypted with the session key, which is symmetric. TLS is the improvement in SSL, and it's more modern. There's various versions of TLS. IPSec is another common encryption technique used. Originally invented to go with IP version 6, but now it's been backported to IP version 4 and can be used by a lot of things. It's commonly used for virtual private networks these days. And there are different ways to use IPSec. The authentication header gives you authentication and integrity, but not confidentiality. It authenticates data. Encapsulating security payload is what gives you confidentiality by encrypting all the contents. One irritating thing about IPSec is it uses strange protocols. I don't know why they do this. But remember the layer 4 protocols, there's TCP and UDP, and that's all your routers ever heard of, and that's all firewalls ever think about. But there are other protocols. I think TCP is 9, UDP is 17. You can have a different layer 4 protocol, and they're used for special purposes, which is a really bad idea because almost no home routers will forward any of those protocols. They don't know about anything other than TCP and UDP. But IPSec is one of the several things they actually use, Protocol 51 and Protocol 50. So this means if you want to use this, you pretty much have to have a direct connection to the internet. If you're behind